The courtroom smelled of old wood and desperation, a stale air that clung to Marcus Tate's skin as he stood, hands cuffed, heart pounding like a war drum. At 17, he'd never imagined his life could unravel so fast, accused of a crime he didn't commit, his voice drowned out by a system that seemed to have already judged him. All because he was black, he thought, and the weight of that truth burned hotter than the prosecutor's glare. It started 3 weeks ago in a quiet Virginia suburb, where Marcus, a straight-A student with dreams of MIT, was walking home from his part-time job at the library. The night was cool, the stars sharp against the sky, and his earbuds hummed with jazz, his father's favorite. Then came the screech of tires. 2 cops pinned him to the pavement, their knees pressing into his back, accusing him of robbing a nearby convenience store. The clerk's description: young, black, hoodie. That was enough to chain Marcus's future to a lie. His protests, his truth meant nothing. The police didn't listen. The clerk didn't waver. And now, in this courtroom, the gavel felt like a guillotine. Your Honor, the defendant's story is inconsistent, the prosecutor, a man named Hargrove with a voice like polished steel, declared. He paced before the bench, his suit pristine, his confidence unshakable. No alibi, no witnesses, just a teenager's word against a respected business owner. This is about accountability, perspective, accountability, not race. Judge Eleanor Vance, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for fairness but a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned forward. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned Marcus. Mr. Tate, you expect this court to believe you were simply walking home at the exact time and place of the robbery? With no one to corroborate your story? Her voice carried a weight that made Marcus's stomach twist. He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. I've heard enough. The evidence points to guilt. Marcus's mother, Clara, sat in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles paled. She'd raised Marcus alone since his father left when he was 5, working double shifts at the hospital to keep him in school, to keep him safe. Now, her eyes glistened with unshed tears, her faith in justice crumbling with every word from the bench. Marcus wanted to scream, to make them see he wasn't a stereotype, wasn't a threat. But the room felt like it was closing in, the walls whispering the same old story: he didn't belong here, didn't deserve to be heard. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest, I'm telling the truth. I wasn't there. I'm not who they say I am. His words hung in the air, fragile, almost lost in the prosecutor's dismissive scoff. Hargrove smirked, adjusting his tie. A compelling performance, Mr. Tate. But the facts don't lie. The security footage shows a figure matching your description, same height, same build, same hoodie. You were arrested 2 blocks away. Explain that. Marcus's jaw tightened. I can't explain a lie. That wasn't me. He'd gone over it 1,000 times in his head, the grainy footage, the hooded figure who could have been anyone. But to them, it was him. To them, he was just another kid from the wrong side of town, another statistic. Clara stood, her voice breaking the tense silence. My son is innocent. He's a good kid, top of his class, never in trouble. You're not even giving him a chance. Her words cracked with pain, but the bailiff motioned her to sit, and the judge's gavel tapped sharply. Mrs. Tate, control yourself, or you'll be removed, Judge Vance said, her tone cold but not cruel. She turned back to Marcus. If you have no further evidence, I'm prepared to move forward with a ruling. The room spun. Marcus's future college, his dreams, his mother's sacrifices teetered on the edge of a verdict. He glanced at Clara, her face a mask of fear and love, and felt a surge of defiance. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for her, for every kid like him who'd been written off before they could speak. Then the courtroom door swung open. A man in a dark suit strode in, his presence commanding, his steps deliberate. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Marcus didn't know him, but something about the man's sharp jawline, the way his eyes locked onto him, felt familiar. The stranger approached the bench, leaning in to speak quietly to Judge Vance. Her expression shifted, first surprise, then something like unease. The room went still. "Your Honor," the man said, loud enough for all to hear, "I have evidence that will change this case." He handed her a folder, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Jonathan Reed. I'm the director of the CIA. And Marcus Tate is my son." Gasps erupted. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Marcus froze, the words slamming into him like a freight train. His father? The man who'd vanished 12 years ago, leaving him and his mother with nothing but questions. The courtroom buzzed, but Marcus's world narrowed to the man standing there, claiming a truth that upended everything. Judge Vance scanned the documents, her brow furrowing. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Reed. You're claiming paternity now, after years of absence. And you have evidence to support the defendant's alibi?" "Yes, Your Honor," Reed said, his voice steady as stone. "I have classified surveillance footage from a federal operation that places Marcus nowhere near the crime scene. It's time-stamped and irrefutable." He glanced at Marcus, his eyes softening for a moment before returning to the judge. "I wasn't there for him before. I'm here now." Hargrove's composure cracked, his voice rising. "This is preposterous. A last-minute stunt to derail justice. We need time to verify this so-called evidence." "Verify it," Reed shot back, "but you'll find it's real. Marcus is innocent, and I won't let him be railroaded by a system that's already made up its mind." The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. "I'll review this evidence in chambers. We'll reconvene in 1 hour." Her gavel struck, and the room erupted in murmurs as Marcus was led back to the holding area, his mind reeling. His father? The CIA? It was too much, too fast. But as he sat in the cold cell, he clung to one thought: maybe, just maybe, the truth still had a chance. An hour later, the courtroom reconvened. Judge Vance's face was unreadable as she took her seat. Marcus's heart hammered, his mother's hand squeezing his arm through the bars before he was brought forward. Reed stood nearby, his presence a strange anchor in the storm. Hargrove, visibly rattled, clutched his notes like a lifeline. After reviewing the submitted footage, Judge Vance began, her voice measured, "I find it credible and consistent with the defendant's account. The figure in the store's security video does not conclusively match Marcus Tate. Furthermore, the new evidence places him at a community center 3 miles away at the time of the robbery, corroborated by multiple witnesses who've since come forward." Marcus's breath caught. Clara let out a choked sob. "The charges against Marcus Tate are dismissed," the judge declared, her gavel striking with finality. "This court is adjourned." The room exploded, Clara's arms around Marcus, tears streaming down her face, the gallery a mix of cheers and stunned whispers. Marcus hugged her back, his own eyes burning, but his gaze drifted to Reed, who stood apart, watching. The man who'd abandoned him had just saved him. But why now? And at what cost? As they left the courthouse, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the steps. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, but Marcus barely noticed. His mother's hand in his was all that grounded him. Reed approached, hesitant, his polished exterior softening. "Marcus," he said, voice low, "I owe you and your mother an explanation. I couldn't be there before me work, the risks, but I never stopped watching over you. I'm sorry it took this to bring me back." Marcus wanted to lash out, to demand answers for 12 years of silence. But Clara's hand tightened, her eyes urging him to listen. "We'll talk," Marcus said finally, his voice raw. "But not today." The weight of the day lingered as they walked away, the city alive around them. Marcus was free, but the fight wasn't over. It never would be, not for him, not for anyone who looked like him. Yet, as he glanced at his mother, her strength unwavering, and even at Reed, a stranger with his eyes, Marcus felt something new, not just relief, but resolve. The system had tried to break him, but it hadn't. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. Marcus Tate walked out of the courthouse into a world that felt both familiar and foreign. The Virginia air was crisp, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but the weight of the day clung to him like damp cloth. His mother, Clara, kept her arm linked with his, her warmth a quiet anchor against the chaos of reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing like gunfire. Jonathan Reed, the man claiming to be his father, trailed a few steps behind, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement, his silence louder than the crowd. Marcus didn't know what to make of him, savior or stranger, hero or ghost. All he knew was that freedom tasted bittersweet, laced with questions that burned hotter than his anger. The next morning, Marcus woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of his mother humming in the kitchen, a habit she'd kept since he was a kid. It was her way of pushing back the darkness, of reclaiming normalcy. But normal felt out of reach. His phone buzzed with notifications, news articles, social media posts, messages from friends and strangers alike. Some called him a victim of a broken system, others, emboldened by anonymity, labeled him a thug who dodged justice because of a powerful father. The truth, Marcus knew, was messier than either side wanted to admit. Clara set a plate of pancakes in front of him, her eyes soft but searching. "You don't have to talk to him, you know," she said, her voice steady despite the strain of the past weeks. "Not until you're ready." Marcus poked at the pancakes, his appetite gone. "He saved me, Ma. But where was he when we needed him? When you were working nights, when I was getting jumped in middle school for being the smart black kid?" His voice cracked, and he hated how young it made him sound. Clara reached across the table, her hand covering his. "I don't trust him either, baby. But he's here now, and that's something. You don't owe him anything, but you deserve answers." The doorbell rang, sharp and intrusive. Marcus tensed, already knowing who it was. Clara gave him a nod, and he rose, his heart a tangle of dread and curiosity. When he opened the door, Reed stood there, his suit replaced by a simple jacket and jeans, his face less guarded than it had been in court. He looked almost human. "Marcus," Reed said, his voice low, "can we talk?" They sat on the porch, the morning air cool against Marcus's skin. Reed didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. I left because my work role at the CIA put you and your mother in danger. I thought staying away was the only way to protect you." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Protect us? You left us with nothing. No letters, no calls, no explanation. Ma worked herself to the bone, and I grew up thinking you didn't care." Reed's eyes flickered with something like pain, but he didn't look away. "I cared. Every day. I kept tabs on you, your grades, your science fairs, your scholarship applications. I was there, Marcus, just not in the way you needed. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make it right." Marcus wanted to believe him, wanted to bridge the gap between the man in front of him and the father he'd imagined as a kid. But trust was a fragile thing, and his was in pieces. "Why now?" he asked. "Why show up when I'm in cuffs, when it's almost too late?" Reed leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Because I couldn't stay away anymore. When I saw the arrest report, saw your name, I knew I had to act. The footage I gave the judge, it wasn't just luck. My team had been monitoring that area for an unrelated operation. When I realized you were caught in the crossfire, I pulled every string I could." Marcus's mind raced. The surveillance, the timing, it all felt too convenient, too perfect. "So you're saying you saved me because you could? What about all the other kids like me, the ones who don't have a CIA director for a dad? What happens to them?" Reed's face hardened, not with anger but with a kind of weary acknowledgement. "You're right. The system's flawed, broken, even. I've seen it from the inside. It chews up people who look like you, who look like me, and spits them out. I can't fix it overnight, but I'm trying to change what I can. Starting with you." The words hit Marcus hard, stirring a mix of hope and frustration. He thought of the courtroom, the prosecutor's smug certainty, the clerk's vague description that had branded him guilty before he could speak. He thought of the other kids in his neighborhood, the ones who'd never get a second chance, whose stories would never make the news. "Trying's not enough," he said finally. "Not when people are losing their lives, their futures." Reed nodded, his expression grim. "I know. But you're not just anyone, Marcus. You're my son, and I'll do whatever it takes to help you fight." Over the next few weeks, Marcus tried to piece his life back together. School was a minefield, classmates whispered, teachers watched him too closely, and the weight of his almost conviction lingered. But he threw himself into his studies, determined to prove he was more than a headline. Clara, meanwhile, insisted on meeting with Reed regularly, not for herself but for Marcus, to ensure he had a say in whatever came next. One evening, Marcus found himself at a community center, invited by a local activist group that had rallied around his case. The room was packed, black, white, young, old, all drawn by the story of a teenager who'd beaten the odds. Marcus stood at a podium, his hands trembling as he faced the crowd. "I'm not here to tell you I'm special," he began, his voice steadying with each word. "I'm here because I got lucky. Because someone with power stepped in. But what about the others? The kids who don't have a secret father, who don't get a second chance. I was almost one of them." His eyes found Clara's in the crowd, her proud smile giving him strength. "This isn't just my story. It's ours. And we have to keep fighting together." The room erupted in applause, but Marcus felt the weight of his own words. Fighting meant more than speeches, it meant action, change, tearing down the walls that had almost crushed him. Reed was there too, standing at the back, his face unreadable. When their eyes met, Marcus didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. It was a start. As weeks turned to months, Marcus and Reed built a fragile connection. They met for coffee, talked about everything and nothing: jazz, science, the past. Reed shared stories of his work, the sacrifices he'd made, the enemies he'd faced. Marcus shared his dreams, his fears, the anger that still simmered when he thought of how close he'd come to losing everything. Clara was the bridge between them, her love for Marcus the glue that held their tentative family together. One day, Marcus received a letter from MIT, his application accepted with a full scholarship. He read it alone in his room, tears blurring the words. When he showed Clara, she pulled him into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. Reed, invited over for dinner that night, offered a quiet congratulations, his pride evident but restrained. "You did this, Marcus," Reed said, his voice thick. "Not me. You." Marcus shook his head. "I had help. Ma, you, even that judge. But I'm not done. I want to make sure no one else has to go through what I did." Reed nodded, a rare smile breaking through. "Then let's do it. Together." The journey wasn't easy. Marcus volunteered with the activist group, speaking at schools, organizing forums, amplifying voices that had been silenced. He faced backlash: online trolls, skeptical reporters, even threats. But he also found allies, people who believed in justice, in fairness, in a world where a kid's skin didn't dictate their fate. Clara stood by him, her strength unwavering, and Reed, true to his word, used his influence to push for reforms, however small. By spring, Marcus's story had sparked a broader conversation. Community leaders met with police, demanding better training, more accountability. The convenience store clerk, shamed by the truth, issued a public apology, though Marcus knew it changed little for those still trapped in the system's gears. Still, it was a small, hard-won victory. On the anniversary of his arrest, Marcus stood outside the courthouse, now a symbol of both pain and triumph. Clara and Reed were with him, along with dozens of supporters. He held a sign that read, "Justice for all, not some." The crowd chanted, their voices rising like a tide. Marcus felt the weight of their hope, their anger, their resolve. He wasn't just a kid anymore, he was a voice, a spark, a reason to keep going. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus turned to the crowd, his heart full. "What's right, what's wrong, what's just, it's up to us to decide," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. "So speak up, stand up, and let's make sure no one's story ends before it begins."